Hey guys, have you heard of Goldbelly? It's this amazing site where they ship the most iconic, famous foods from restaurants across the country, anywhere, nationwide. I've never found a more perfect gift than food. They ship Chicago deep dish pizza, New York bagels, Maine lobster rolls, and even Ina Garten's famous cakes. So if you're looking for a gift for the food lover in your life, head to goldbelly.com and get 20% off your first order with promo code GIFT.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
Fentanyl, it is a word, it is an issue that is front and center right now, thanks to a certain man named Donald J. Trump, the occupant of the White House in Washington, D.C. But fentanyl has been a problem in Canada for a long time. In fact, you look at any major city, even smaller cities, smaller communities across the country, the crime that you see, the homelessness that you see, the homeless encampments, all of this is related in one way or another to fentanyl. A drug that started showing up in a big way around 2016, spread across the country. More than 49,000 people have died of overdoses from this drug. Hello and welcome to the Full Comment Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about how we deal with fentanyl within Canada. Trump has highlighted the issue, he's gotten us talking about it, but how do we solve the problem in our own country for our own people? Marshall Smith is the former chief of staff to Alberta Premier Danielle Smith. He's also someone who dealt with addiction himself and turned his life around. The Alberta model, which doesn't include giving addicts free opioids, has been focused on addiction treatment, on full recovery, and it's showing good results. But this is about more than just addiction treatment. This is a police issue. This is a crime issue. So how do we solve this? How do we get the government, wherever we live, working properly for us? That's why I wanted to reach out to Marshall Smith. So, Marshall, let me just jump in off the top. Why did it take Donald Trump talking about fentanyl on the Canadian border to get us to realize how bad of a problem this is in Canada? We'll deal with the border issue in a moment, but within our own communities, this has been a devastating crisis.
Well, look, Brian, it's great to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about this. I think you're right. I think that often, just like with addiction itself, it takes some sort of catalyzing event to spur on change. And that is certainly what we've seen happen in and around the pressure that Canada is now under to deal with the fentanyl and addiction crisis. And I think that the answer to your direct question is why did it take that is it's the nature of the addicted system. It will continue unabated until something acts on it that is very powerful to make it change its course. And B, it's about leadership, right? We have not had the type of leadership on this file in Canada, with, of course, I would say the exception of Alberta, to plan and execute on major systemic change. That's not to say, and I want to be really clear about this, that's not to say that people aren't doing anything about it. It's not to say that there aren't pockets of good work. And it's not to say that, premiers across the country don't rank this as top priority for them. I just think that many of them don't know how to lead in an environment of making this kind of change.
You look at something like the opioid deaths in British Columbia, and just because they're always off the top of my head, I look at the coroner's office numbers monthly. And you go back a decade, 2014, there were, I believe the number is 374 opioid deaths in 2014. And it goes up a little bit in 15 and 16. And then that's when fentanyl really kicks in as the preferred opioid. My mistake, I just pulled the numbers up. It's 370. The high was 23 with 2,578. Last year, well, there was a big drop to only 2,253. That's just British Columbia. Alberta's been heavily hit. Ontario's been heavily hit. And it slowly started to move out to the other provinces as well. This is something that we should have been dealing with in terms of trying to get a handle on this drug and its nasty impacts within our community, from overdose deaths to rising gun crime rates to all the other ills that go with it. And it seemed like for the longest time, the only acceptable path was the one that you and Premier Smith rejected in Alberta. The only acceptable path was give them more drugs.
Right. Look, this is a conversation about leadership. And, I've spent, since I retired from public service, have spent, a lot of time forming my thoughts on what it was that I wanted to talk to leaders in the country about on this issue. And of course, we can spend forever debating the merits of this program versus that program. And I'm happy to do that. But I think the first conversation that we need to have is, what does taking this seriously look like? And I've had many conversations with premiers from coast to coast, many in the middle of the night, as they sort of call around for, bits of advice. And I've often said to them, you're not taking this seriously. And they seem offended when I say that. They seem really taken aback. But the reality is, when a government in Canada wants to show the public, and not just for show, but in reality, that they're taking an issue seriously, there's a couple of things that they do, right? First of all, they put themselves in charge. They form a committee of cabinet. They say this is a cross-government initiative. We're going to make decisions in this body. We're going to put the bureaucrats around the ministers at the table. We're going to give them direction. There's going to be a record of decision. They're going to execute, and we're going to hold them accountable, and we're going to track the outcomes, and we're going to have a vision. That's what taking it seriously looks like.
What I've seen, and this is from observing the Ford government closely here in Ontario, but also looking at what other governments have done, it seems like the harm reduction advocates had really taken hold of the agenda. And within the bureaucracies, I've been told there was pushback. I mean, the Ford government recently decided to close consumption sites, which were also doubling, thanks to the federal government, not due to any policy of the provincial government. They were also doubling as safe supply sites, quote unquote. They closed 10 of them near schools and daycares. And instead, several of them are transferring into what's called heart hubs, full addiction, wraparound services, all of that. It took a lot of effort and political capital within the government just to get that kind of change, because the bureaucracy is so entrenched in keeping things as they were. A safe injection site, wherever you can get them, a place to hand out opioid pills. And it got so bad, the famous one in Toronto, the South Riverdale Community Health Center, where the shooting happened when mother of two was tragically killed just walking down the street. It had gotten so bad that they said right on their website that even though they're required by virtue of their license to be offering people a path to treatment, it actually said on their website that they had no expectation of you ever stopping using drugs.
Yeah, that's right.
So, I mean, how did you deal with that when you were in the Alberta government? I'm sure you had some of the same issues.
Well, listen, I'll take, continue on sort of where I left off, because it's part of the same answer. you have to have a serious governance mechanism in place, right? You need not just, this problem is too big to rest on any one minister's shoulder. It crosses all kinds of boundaries: public safety, indigenous relations, justice, education, health, mental health and addiction, corrections, policing. This has gotten too out of control to put on the back of any one minister. And because of the nature of addiction and working in addicted systems, the people who work in them become affected by the crisis of addiction that they work in every day. There was a great saying that I used to tell the kind of patients in treatment all the time. And I would say to them, what you live in, you learn. What you learn, you practice. What you practice, you become. And what you become has consequences. And Brian, look at the consequences of what we've become. And the answer to your question about the bureaucracies is just that, right? The only voices that they're interested in hearing are the ones with similar views to themselves. And it's not just that they passively ignore voices that say we should be doing something different. They are absolutely hostile, right? They are absolutely vociferously hostile towards any notion that we should tell people that it's probably a bad idea that you shoot fentanyl into your neck, right? Yeah. And that you should come off of that and that there's a better life for you. And for whatever reason, the people who share these views have taken up post in public health agencies across the country and sort of metastasized into health bureaucracies and health authorities. That's where they have taken up post, and to a certain extent, academia.
This is an issue, though, that you mentioned earlier: ministers of public safety, health, and so on. I mean, this is a huge public safety issue. Yes. We have Chinese triads, Mexican cartels, biker gangs, all of them trading in this stuff. And it was probably around 2017 or so. I was living in Ottawa and was noticing the uptick in gun crime. And so I talked to Ottawa Police Chief Charles Bordelot, and I said, "What's going on?" And he started talking to me about fentanyl entering the Ottawa market. It, arrived there late 2016, 2017. And he said, this stuff is so valuable to them that if they used a fist before, they use a knife now. If they used the knife before, they're using guns now. And he said, everyone is arming up. That was in sleepy Ottawa. We have had a huge uptick in gun crime pretty much everywhere that this stuff has shown up. That should have been an impetus enough to jump in, to say, okay, we need to take the organized crime element and the street crime element seriously. How serious is the crime part of it? Because I'm sure when you were chief of staff to the premier that you would get briefings and see statistics. How serious is that aspect of it that we don't talk enough about?
Yeah, it's incredibly serious. And I think that it's so serious that often, the realities of what that looks like on the streets of Canada are kept muted, because what there is to say about it when you open the kimono is very scary. Automatic weapons, human trafficking, the sort of atrocities that are going on. This is the consequences of what we've become, because we've allowed the public policy conversation to become hijacked by drug user unions and people who think that we should take all of the money away from the police and that they should go away, and that people should be allowed to use drugs whenever and wherever they want, and if they don't have any, that we should give them to them. And I got to tell you, Brian, I have to tell you, who's at fault for that? It's not drug addicts that are at fault for that. I'm going to take a lot of criticism from my conservative friends across the country. But I would dare to say that, drug addicts have a health problem. They're really sick. And we can have a lot of conversations about how they became that way. But the reality is their brains are hijacked by highly potent chemicals. Their job is to go from A to B and get drugs and use drugs. That is their life. That's what they do. They're the only ones in this equation who are doing their job. It's on the rest of us in the community to set boundaries, to say, we're not doing this anymore. Enough is enough. We're going to demand the political courage, leadership, and vision to make change. We're going to be okay with putting up some bucks to build treatment centers, to build therapeutic living units in our correctional centers, to actually do a good job at this, what we should have been doing for decades that we've failed to do. Instead, we have done nothing, and we've expected nothing. We carry our Starbucks, we walk down the sidewalk, we step over homeless people, blissfully carrying on our day, ignoring the problem. And so, look, I at some point, we can sit around and we can point fingers at those homeless drug addicts that are out there all the time. And I'm not removing responsibility. In fact, I'm one of the biggest advocates in the country to say that they have to take responsibility for their health. But we have a responsibility to set the standards in our community and to make sure that the people who are advising the government and the governments themselves are putting forward robust and realistic visions for how we're going to keep control of the social contract and to make sure that there are outcomes and that we're moving in that direction.
We've got the homeless aspect of it. We've got the addictions aspect of it, but we've also got just bad policy. So you were talking about therapeutic treatment centers in jails. Instead, we're getting reports out of Parliament calling for decriminalization of drugs or putting safe injection sites in jails to just keep them moving along. The drugs are illegal, but you want a safe injection site in there. How are they getting the drugs? Oh, they're smuggling them in, so breaking the law again. This is madness. I agree. You should be getting treatment while you're in jail. We haven't been doing that. We've had decades of academics pushing what I think are garbage advocacy, activist studies to get politicians to move in this direction. And we've been listening to bad advice for years.
Right. Look, let's talk about corrections. In the Alberta recovery model that we've built, which, by the way, we're seeing very tremendous early results. We've cut fatal overdoses by 40% year over year. It's tremendous. There's a lot of work by a lot of people that's gone into that. Corrections has been a big focus of ours. And, I often tell, some of the folks that are working in our system that they have a remarkable grasp of the obvious in building out our system, which is to say, we took living units, which hold about 30 or 40 inmates, out of each correctional center, and we turned them into treatment centers. So treatment centers inside correctional centers, and we staffed them with therapists and peer workers. And there's lineups to get into these units. Not because it's an easier ride. And in fact, to my friends who are listening to this, who are law and order, kind of tough on drugs advocates, which is fine. I'm all for being tough on drugs. I think that conservatives have incorrectly identified the corollary between being tough on drugs and being hard on people.
I want to get people treatment, and I want to bust the gangs.
Listen, you're talking about different things. I mean, the therapeutic correctional units that we have is some of the toughest time that you can serve. These inmates, in a regular living unit in jail, okay, you wake up in the morning, maybe you make your bed, eat some chocolate bars, have breakfast, go to the gym, watch some TV, have a nap, talk on the phone. That's the daily life of an inmate. In a therapeutic living unit, they're up at 7 a.m., bed made tight, hospital corners. They're sitting in a chair in a circle with their therapists, confronting their issues, facing themselves and their peers. And I'm not talking about just filling in tick box forms. I'm talking about butts in seats, doing the ugly crying, transforming yourself, right? And that goes on for 10 hours a day. So I would put to you, what does tough on drugs look like, right? If I had it my way, every correctional unit in the country would be a therapeutic living unit. As a taxpayer, I think I have the right to demand a return on my investment. I have no problem investing in getting people who go in, they've committed a crime. They're there as punishment, not for punishment. They go in there. What are we going to do with them? You've got addicts and alcoholics. They're all pooled up in one spot. What a horrible opportunity missed if we're not going in there and doing things like this.
What's the cost differential between a regular jail and one of these therapeutic? Is it, several times higher than just, warehousing people?
Well, not at all. I mean, it's pennies on the dollar. I mean, we run one of these living units for maybe $1 million a year. And one of those inmates can do $1 million a year in damage, in the community easily, just one of them. So, and we're doing hundreds and hundreds of them. So no, it's very, very inexpensive. Think about all of the things that you don't have to build. You don't have to build a building, right? You already have one. They already have a bed to sleep in. You're already feeding them. They already have medical services. They already have all of these things that are already there that you don't have to spend any more money on. Just put the therapists in there, right? And have a tough program. They're still correctional officers and they're kind of part of it. But any one of those inmates that will come out of there, and by the way, in our model in Alberta, we've built, every correctional center has a sister recovery community treatment center on the outside. And so when an inmate comes to the end of their sentence in the therapeutic living unit, they can transfer to the treatment center to finish their treatment, in the community. So we're building a system of care. And that's the type of vision, not just giving a grant, cutting a ribbon, giving a grant, cutting a ribbon with no thought to how these things interconnect and how we're going to put people on a pathway, a true pathway to wellness.
Have you been doing it long enough to see whether there's a drop in recidivism?
Absolutely, there's a drop in recidivism. It's a significant one. It's going to be like north of 50% reduction. Maybe even more. I'm expecting something in the area of 60 to 70% reduction in recidivism.
All right, Marcia, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk more about the border issue. I had a conversation with Premier Smith about how fentanyl and the labs are growing in BC and Alberta a little while ago. We'll get into that and why we caught the Americans' attention for all the wrong reasons. Back in moments.
BTW, FYI. Visit Nexplanon.com RN to learn about Nexplanon. It's an adjustable implant, 68 milligrams radio pain. Or ask your HCP IRL. Okay, TTYL.
Postmedia is launching a brand new podcast, Canada Did What. It'll be hosted by Tristan Hopper, Funny guy, interesting guy. He's been on this podcast. Canada Did What? We'll dig into the untold, surprising political stories of the last few decades. And Tristan Hopper is going to look at everything from the metric wars to Morgentaler, the October crisis, the abortion debate. We're unpacking all the wildest political moments you might think you remember and giving you the real story that you never knew. Tristan will talk to the politicians, journalists, newsmakers who were right there when history happened. And he's going to have a lot of fun doing it. That is coming out shortly, so keep an eye out for that one. So, Marshall, bringing it back to where we started about Donald Trump and giving us a kick in the butt about fentanyl, the Trudeau government, when he first said, you've got a problem on your border, they said, no, we don't. We're less than 1%. Just look at that stat, just 43 pounds. That's it. Yeah. And my thought was, well, we're probably not catching very much. In 2 months since Ontario launched their Operation Deterrence, where they're doing border patrols, the OPP and their municipal partners have seized 46 pounds of fentanyl, more than across the entire country. I'm sure that the Alberta sheriffs are going to find some more. I'm sure that the SQ in Quebec, etc. And when I was speaking with Premier Smith, she said, the human smuggling thing, that happens more in Eastern Canada, but she said fentanyl labs are becoming a big business in BC, and it's moving into Alberta, and we've got to be concerned about that. How big is the operation, and is it spreading?
I think the operation is significant enough to warrant a bulletin from the Canadian Criminal Intelligence Service that I read not long ago. Was not a classified document, so I'm happy to talk about it. But it was a bulletin that basically said that the service was now prepared to say that Canada was now a fentanyl exporting country. So
was this the FinTrack study?
No,
or report?
This is the Canadian Criminal Intelligence Service.
FinTrack said something similar, and they're the ones that track the money laundering, which apparently is huge in Canada.
Yeah. So look, we are fentanyl producers. A lot of the precursors come in, and it happens here. And look, we are a country with wide open spaces, with lots of real estate, and lots of places to hide to do these things. So these things can go relatively undetected. And over the last 20 years, our law enforcement bodies have dramatically reduced the amount of budget associated with drug enforcement. I remember, back in my day, running around Vancouver, there was a drug squad in Vancouver that was about 75 full-time officers strong. And, recently, over the last couple of years, I inquired again from a friend of mine who's on the force, and they had been reduced to 11. Now,
75
to 11.
20 odd years ago to 11.
Yeah. So even though the problem is getting bigger, the number has been dropping. And the reality for the chiefs of police has been that they have had mayors who often control the police commissions, who are putting tremendous budget pressures to cut police budgets, right? And because they want to repurpose that money to harm reduction programs or other services. And the public has kind of gone along with it, Brian. Like there hasn't been a scream to say, like, we're not going to stand for this. The public kind of went, oh yeah, decrim, yeah, maybe it's a good idea. Let's try it. And so they're going to reapportion those budgets and put them into response policing. And that's exactly what we've seen across the country. So we are missing out on, really robust intelligence, specialized units, source handling, and all of those kind of specialized functions that go into policing or that used to go into policing. Because look, you don't catch fentanyl labs by having police officers driving a police car down Bloor Street, right? Essentially, that's not how it's done. It's done by having specialized squads that know how to recruit and handle sources, human sources, that give them information, that help in their investigations, and they follow, up the stream to find it. And a lot of the investments that governments have made in these type of services over the years have been decimated.
It's very depressing, to listen to. One of the things that I noted in an executive order signed by President Trump on this issue was that they specifically said the fentanyl's coming in from Canada through the mail. And I thought, wait a minute, that sounds like how it used to come into Canada from China. And then, people scoffed at that. And just 2 weeks ago, a shipping center in Seattle, they're doing just spot checks. They open up a package. There's a pound of it. It had just come in a shipment from Canada.
Right. Yeah. Well, look, in Canada, the last time that I've been kind of not in my chair in office for a while, but it hasn't been that long, so I still have relatively fresh information, and I can say generally that a lot of the drugs that come in into our country are coming in through our ports, in particular the Port of Vancouver. A lot of these drugs are also coming in on ships where the load is dumped, into the water and buoyed off the west coast of Vancouver Island. Then people go out and get it and bring it back in, and it makes its way, from Vancouver Island through Vancouver, and then starts making its journey east.
So it may not even come into the port. They're throwing it overboard for people to pick up.
That's right. I mean, why would you risk all of the security at the port when you can just
what security at the port?
When you can just dump it, a mile offshore and a boat just comes to pick it up. Why would you take the risk? So, so there's a lot of that's been going on for years. Also, the commercial transportation industry, from Vancouver going east, is also chock-a-block full of drug muling that brings the product kind of from British Columbia, and moves it across the country. So look, it's a very difficult conversation to talk about interprovincial borders. And certainly I don't think anybody wants to see kind of, border facilities in between provinces. I think that's a non-starter. But we should absolutely be beefing up commercial vehicle inspections, utilizing canines and other technology, and I think those should be partnerships. They should be things that bring provinces together rather than dividing them. Alberta and British Columbia, for example, should be collaborating on cross-border interdiction. They should have their commercial vehicle units collaborating on making sure that there are more inspections and introducing things like drug sniffing dogs to those loads.
Part of how they've been finding stuff in Ontario was 17,000 truck inspections in very short order.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah.
Right, and that is part of it. So you have advised governments across the country. You're sitting in the room with, let's say, I'm in Queen's Park. I'm 2 floors up from Premier Ford's office. We're all assuming, let's say you're sitting in his room.
Yeah.
What are you telling him? What are the 5 things that you're saying? Here's what you need to do to deal with this problem from a crime perspective, from an addictions perspective, from a public safety perspective.
Well, the number one thing that I will and do hammer on the premiers to do is to get their governance in order. Right? They're not organized appropriately to tackle these issues. We're still using government structures that were built in the 70s. to try and tackle some really complicated societal issues. Governments aren't set up to do this properly. So this is a leadership issue. The premiers need to start taking leadership roles in these cross-government initiatives. You need to form a committee of cabinet. It needs to have the full power of cabinet to make decisions and to take action on issues. You need to have a vision that committee of cabinet can work towards. And you need to have, most importantly, the reason why you need a committee of cabinet with the full legal authority of cabinet to make decisions and have records of decisions is because that's how bureaucrats take their marching orders, right? If a premier goes out to the microphone and says, I think I'd like to do this, that isn't what gets the bureaucrats into action, right? There's no legal requirement on them to take action and there's no accountability for them. But when cabinet makes a decision and there's a record of decision and it's given to the cabinet secretary to say, here is your lawful order, execute, then they must take action. So we're not using the mechanisms of government the way that they need to be used, and we're not using them in a contemporary way to tackle these big issues. And so, it shouldn't fall on any one minister, right? There needs to be input and decision-making from multiple places to kind of tackle these. Secondly, I would say once you get your governance set up and the stakeholders and the people who provide the services in the province, they can see that there's a clear decision-making body, which I think is something that needs to be done immediately. Then they will start, rowing along with the government and keeping that cadence, and that's how you make progress. We need dramatically more treatment. We need places for people to go, and I don't think that we need to be smart about it. I mean, in Alberta, we didn't want to just build treatment centers. We needed a new mental model about how we were going to tackle this issue. We didn't want to have expensive buildings where people go in for 30 days and they're relatively ineffective. We wanted to have housing for people that needed it. We wanted to have very intensive therapy for substance use disorder, and mental health, and it needed to be long enough, up to a year. So we built the concept of a recovery community, which is a building about the size of a football field. They hold about 100 people. It's a model of housing built on a treatment chassis. So people go in there and it's individualized care. People take varying lengths of time to go through that, and it needs to be funded. It's outrageous in this country that somebody whose child is dying should have to take out their MasterCard and max it out in order to get the care that their loved one needs, right? It should be no different than if I break my leg and go into the hospital to get care. And again, doing this compared to the consequences of what is going on in our major cities across the country is pennies on the dollar. In Edmonton, I'll just tell you a story. In downtown Edmonton, we had one company who wanted to come and make a $100 million investment in downtown Edmonton. They came and walked around, they got back on their plane and they left, right? So
because of how it looked.
Yeah, for sure. They didn't want their staff, having to walk through parking lots like this. That's going on all over the place. Untreated addiction costs our economy in Canada $47 billion a year. $47 billion.
It's funny you picked on Edmonton. A little while ago, Kevin Hassett, who is one of Trump's top economic advisors, he's got an office in the White House.
Yeah.
He was on CNBC. I'm not sure if you saw this interview.
I did.
And he specifically talked about being in Edmonton, walking out of his hotel room and seeing zombies wander the street. And this is a guy who has done a lot of business over the years in Canada, who loves coming up to Canada to fish, and said he couldn't believe what Edmonton looked like.
Yeah. Well, look, I'll just preface that. I did see that, and it was noticed. I will say that his visit to Edmonton was quite old. It was years ago that he made that visit, and a lot has changed and a lot of work has gone into it. But there's still a lot. Look, there's a lot of work that needs to happen. And when I was chief of staff, I would love to have spent 100% of my time, focusing on this. But the reality is that, I'll be quite blunt. 50% of my time when I was working on this file was spent fighting back lunatic drug activists. And so, 50% of your time is spent making progress. I would love to not have that fight and be able to, go all in. But this is the nature of democracy.
So if they fix their governance structures, they build a proper model. I like what I'm seeing out of Alberta's model. It's much better than the let's give them more opioids model of British Columbia. Let's decriminalize like British Columbia. They do that. Do they also have to, you mentioned earlier the drug units, 75 down to 11 in Vancouver. Do they need to start funding police units to go after the organized crime? Because these are big multinational crime syndicates. You can't have a beat cop looking after that,
right? But then this, for sure, this is my point. Like I don't want to hear out of politicians anymore that we're going to fund 75 more cops on the street. That look, that's great, and we should have that too. But the police presence, that command presence, for sure makes Jane and John Citizen and myself feel safe when they're around, and that's not nothing. But that's not how you get to the core of these issues that are going on. Look, the criminals that are running sophisticated criminal networks in terms of drug-involved networks that are transnational and trans-border drug trafficking are incredibly sophisticated actors. And no beat cop is going. They could be standing right next to them. They'd never even know it because that's not what they're programmed to look for. So I want to hear more from Canada's premiers about funding specialized units. I want to see more human intelligence, more source handling, more specialized units that are looking into these things. And I recognize that we don't have the ability often to speak publicly about operational issues. Like we don't get deep into operational issues. But that shouldn't prevent us from talking about what's going to be required to move the needle and put, criminal organizations like that on notice to say, like, we're going to do whatever we can to disrupt what's going on. There was a mayor, and I use the analogy because I get asked this question a lot across the country. There's a mayor in BC who said, what can we do as a city to improve services and repel criminals? And I said, look, you already have the formula. You do it every day in your economic development arms, right? When you create the conditions for business to flourish by lowering taxes and making provisions for special zones and this, that, and thing, lo and behold, business flourishes. Well, you know what? We made business flourish for drug crime, right?
Oh, yes.
We created the conditions just like an economic development arm would do. We removed the consequences. We brought in supply. We took away any impediments that they would have to do business. And so it shouldn't be a shock to anybody that business flourished, right? These are the same things we do when we want any other business to flourish.
Except it was the wrong one.
Yeah.
Marshall Smith, thanks so much for the time today.
Great to see you, Brian. All the best.
Full Comment is a post-media podcast. My name's Brian Lilly, your host. This episode was produced by Andre Prue. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Kevin Libin is the executive producer. You can subscribe, and please do subscribe to Full Comment on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, wherever you get your podcast. Help us out by giving us a rating, leaving us a review. Tell your friends about us. Thanks for listening. Until next time, I'm Brian Lilly.